You're listening to the 40 Thrive Podcast, the show created for women 40 and beyond, ready to shake things up. And now, your host, Jackie McDougall.
Welcome back to another episode of 40 Thrive. Today's guest is Angela Chee. Angela is a keynote speaker, media communication coach, and host of the brand new The Power of the Only podcast. If you've ever felt like the only, meaning the only woman, the only person of color, the only anything in your work, community, or family, I think this episode and Angela's message will resonate deeply. Speaking of resonating deeply, a few days back, I shared something in the 40 Thrive community that was really hard for me. So I see podcasters all the time ask their communities for help. Often they turn to sites like Patreon that allow fans and followers to contribute money in exchange for a little something special. The whole idea, while I think it's cool, absolutely terrified me. For over 2 years, I've given blood, sweat, and tears, along with my very small team, to help women over 40 thrive in their lives. It's truly my honor. So why was I so afraid to ask the community to give in return? Well, that's a topic for another Oprah, but the short answer is, like you, I was afraid to ask for help. That was actually a poll I added to our group, and more women than not also have a hard time asking for help. So I give my time and energy in creating content here. I have dreams for bigger events, live, in person, and online, but I can't do it all by myself and on my own dime forever. I'm excited to hire more women over 40, give them jobs to join Team 40 Thrive, to create workshops that will help you thrive in work, wealth, and wellness, to offer guidance to women feeling stuck at this stage of life. But here's the thing, I can't do it without you. And it's exactly why I've created 3 tiers of 40 Thrive support. There's something for everyone, from our 43vers who contribute just $3 a month, to joining our book club, to the exciting 40 Thrive membership coming up soon. You have to stay tuned for that. My life's work is to help you thrive. So I have to give a shout out to those who've said yes to supporting this work. Our Thrivers, the $3 Club, Barbara, Pam, Julie, Courtney, Lisa, Carly, Andrea, Delisa. Like, whoa, thank you, thank you, thank you. And our new book club members at the $10 level, Emily, Laura, Rocky. And before our 40 Thrive membership is even launched, I got to give a huge welcome to Christine and Amy. They've already jumped in without the membership being ready. So because of you and the women who follow you in supporting this little group and podcast that can become everything I dreamed it to be. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So let's get to today's guest. Angela Chee's mission is to help people break through their barriers, step into the spotlight, and live their legacy. Now she's highlighting those people in her brand new and soon to be wildly successful podcast, The Power of the Only. We talk about the evolution of women, how fear presents itself when we're over 40 versus when we're younger, and getting comfortable with our own voice in whatever season we find ourselves in. Take a listen. Angela, welcome to 40 Thrive.
Jackie, I'm so excited to be here.
We've worked sort of like parallel to each other for so many years, and blogging and video and all the digital. And so now we're finally united. I love it.
And I love it because you've evolved and so have I, but it all comes back together, right? But you have all the credentials and the foundation of the early years of TV and media. And it's just amazing what's happening now.
And it's a perfect segue into, let's talk about that evolution of a woman in her career. You know, you look it up in the dictionary and there you are, Angela Chee is like, right there as an example. So you started off several years ago on camera as a reporter. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, well, early years, I always wanted to be a reporter ever since I was young, right? So I was a little kid sitting at home in Los Angeles, and I remember seeing Connie Chung on TV. So that's really how it all started. And my dad's like, hey, you could be like Connie Chung, because there's very few Asian people on
Right.
television. And it was just planted a seed. Wasn't really my goal necessarily that young. So I went to college for communication and broadcast journalism, but I chickened out because I wanted to go the safe route. Right. I was like, okay, well, I'll work in marketing or I'll work in advertising. So I worked in PR. I worked in my first job was in entertainment at Paramount Pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the bug of television and really knowing my stuff still kind of was gnawing at me. So long story short, I started my career in entertainment as an assistant, learning the television business, helping launch Entertainment Tonight China, doing all the grunt work. But at night, I started working on my reel, the old school way when there was no YouTube and there was no
Right.
phone cameras, and interning and working at local cable and looking for opportunities, and just started getting good on camera. And then I got my first reporter job, and then I left Paramount. So that's how it all started, doing small markets in Palm Springs, Bakersfield, eventually making it back to Los Angeles, where I was morning news reporter, Inland Empire reporter, and then fill-in anchor in Los Angeles, and then morning anchor here in San Diego.
Wow.
So that's kind of summarizing it all.
That was a great elevator speech. So let's talk for a second about that safe move. Was that totally inspired by you, or was that sort of part of your upbringing?
Yes. And you know what? What's interesting is I didn't realize that point until later on. And that's one of the big parts of my training. I didn't really realize that, I think, until I was already a reporter in Los Angeles, because you don't think about that when you're young. If you have a barrier, you just go through it. It either stops you and you don't know that it stopped you, or you go through it and you think that you're so type A, I got this all under control, that you don't have any barriers. And when I really took a look back, I think the moment that I understood this was I had a voice coach, because I was in Los Angeles and I needed to get more up level, go national level with the deeper voice. So I did some voice training with a celebrity voice coach. And there's all these people on the wall that, from LA News and celebrities. And he said to me, he's like, do you think being Asian changes your voice or holds you back? And I said, excuse me? What? I'm a reporter in Los Angeles. Nothing holds me back. This is in my cocky 20-something years,
Right.
30. And I thought about it and I was like, oh, you mean my voice. And I thought about it. And now that I'm into personal development, now that I'm a coach, it totally makes sense. But when I was 26 years old, I didn't think anything held me back. Right? Because I was a go-getter. You just powered through. So you were asking about that. And so what I realized is, yes, there were voices in my head that were subconscious or unconscious, whether or not they actually stop you, but they hold you back a bit because, my parents were Chinese immigrants and they played it safe and they told me not to rock the boat. And that's the way I was raised. I wasn't raised to be on television. I wasn't raised to be bold. I think my personality did take over, and you are who you are, but it also takes cultivation to break through some of those barriers, and also to realize that sometimes, yes, your upbringing can play a factor in your voice, but it doesn't have to stop you.
Right.
So I realized that it took me 3 years, of working at Paramount, and I worked for about 2 years. And then that final year, I drove every weekend to Palm Springs because I got a weekend reporter job. So I worked 7 days a week for a year to get my reel and to get, just get the journalistic background to really know that I could do it. And when I left, I told my boss, he's like, I don't know when you were going to stop doing that. Finally, like I said, I just can't do it all. I'm quitting and I'm just going to go all in. I played the safe route. I wanted to make money, and which is smart too, right? You don't have to put all your everything on the table. But you don't want those inner voices, whether from your upbringing or for yourself or some hardship, stop you ultimately. So they slowed me down a bit, but they didn't stop me.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the fear when we're in our 20s, that we feel it and we may make certain decisions that feel safer, like staying at Paramount while you do this thing on the weekends. But ultimately, you were working toward your dream.
Yeah, and I didn't do it right away.
Right. And I worked in TV news in Boston, and I would be a waitress for the lunch shift on Sundays at a local chain. And then I would literally change my clothes in my little Ford Escort and drive into Boston and work in the news station, not on camera. It meant more to me than the fear. And so I just kept going, and we were willing to do those things. And let's go back though. So now you've gotten into TV and you're anchoring and you're doing all the things that you set out to do, at what point were you like, maybe this isn't necessarily for me anymore?
Not until, so I was on the trajectory, right? I'd worked my butt off in small markets, and I got my big break in Los Angeles.
Which is a huge market.
I mean, it was my goal my whole life. I thought I
Yeah.
was going to, I live in San Diego now. I thought I'd go to San Diego, San Francisco, and interim. I went straight from Bakersfield to Los Angeles.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay, because it's my hometown. It's where I grew up. I watched every station. I knew all the neighborhoods. It was where I should have been,
Mm-hmm.
But I figured, let's take the long route. So when I made it, it was a lot of pressure because you could easily not get renewed. And so,
Right.
but I got to Los Angeles, but no, I always loved my work. That's like, wow, this is my life. It has begun. Then I really started my life. I got a place. I started dating more because it was very volatile back and forth in different cities. I never had a serious boyfriend just because I was really focused. So when I got back to Los Angeles, I didn't start evolving until after I got married and after I had children. And that was about 10 years ago, probably 11 years ago that I left news full time. So after I worked several years in LA, I worked at HGTV, I worked for E! Entertainment, and I was doing some HGTV. And I realized that I probably wouldn't get the top anchor spot. It was just kind of my shining star was there, but I just got engaged and I was like, am I just going to cover these stories all day long? I woke up at 2:00 in the morning. I worked the 5 a.m. in the morning show and I loved it. But I was always a mix of telling deep stories and interviewing, not just the hardcore early morning doom and gloom. I'm not a
Right.
chaser. I can do
Yeah.
all that. I've done all the hard news. I've done all the tragedies, but that wasn't my big mission in the world. So I always still emceed events and I spoke at schools and I love the whole thing. I didn't love putting out bad news. I love
Right.
the whole idea of being a pillar in the community, helping people share their stories, knowing what was going on. After I got married, I got an anchor opportunity in San Diego, and it was the morning show, my own 4-hour show. And so that was like, of course, right? And I asked my husband, I said, do you want to go to San Diego? He said, yeah, I love San Diego. He was in Orange County. For those of you, this is very California talk,
Yeah.
but he just lived in an area that he didn't like the hubbub of LA and the whole entertainment and all that. We lived kind of in between. And so it was a perfect solution because he started fresh. I started fresh. We built a whole new life in San Diego. I was the morning anchor here. And then I had my first child and the station was kind of falling apart. They hadn't, just to be honest, I love the people I work with. They all work really hard, but there wasn't as much funds as there was in Los Angeles. And so the things that they promised didn't necessarily happen. And I had already done all of it, right? I'd done all
Right.
of it.
Right.
And I just had a baby. And I went through all the fires, while pregnant. There was I think October, we all remember we were all pregnant. All the women that had babies around the same time I did, there was a huge fire season where we all had to be evacuated. And I was on the air, pregnant,
Oh.
evacuated from my home in a hotel, waking up
Living
at 3
the
o'clock
dream,
in the
girl. Living the
3
dream.
o'clock in the morning, trying to keep everybody together, knowing that this is my first child and I didn't really know what was going on at that point. So I'd done all the work. I felt I loved the job, but it wasn't where I saw myself going and there wasn't enough support. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to host shows. I'm going to continue speaking and I'm going to be with my baby.
That's
And I
awesome.
hadn't taken a break for so long, right? 2:30 every morning for like years since I had made it. I was good. Then starts the process of entrepreneur evolution, which is a whole other story, which you can talk about. But at that point, for the first year after my baby was born, I was good. I made a conscious choice.
Yeah. Well, it's tough though, because when you're living in an industry like that, I don't know for you, but one can sometimes feel like, is this the last time someone will offer me a job? If I back away from this and I pay more attention at home or wherever you want to pay more attention, that will I be able to go back? Will I still be relevant? And then add on top of that magical number of 40, ahead of you. It's really tough to say no to things. So how do you feel like you had the strength to say, I'm going to stay on my own path and not feel like I have to stay here just in case nothing else ever shows up?
Yeah. And I have to be honest, if it had worked out exactly the way I wanted to, I'd probably, if I wouldn't have necessarily wanted to make the bold move. I think it was because it just didn't have enough financial backing. It wasn't the big market. Like I'd worked at HGTV and Entertainment Tonight and LA, and San Diego was just a smaller market. It just didn't make sense. And I was like, I can host shows, I can speak, I can make this work. Whereas if I got an offer at the Today Show or I got the main anchor job in LA, I probably, I might not have I wouldn't have needed to pivot necessarily. I
Right.
think for me, it was a combination of, ooh, well, maybe this gives me some time to figure out what I really want. So sometimes you kind of almost have to have your own will and know, but almost life almost has to sometimes guide you or kick you out the door before you make
Yes.
the right choice. So, and I wouldn't have said that, there was any reason why I had to leave, but it just didn't make sense. The opportunity that was there for me at the time, to be perfectly honest. And I'll have to tell you something. This was really interesting of how this can play with you. Because sometimes you're like, do I trust my gut or do I trust the universe's will? Right. So I left to have a baby and I was open to opportunities, but I didn't want to move far away. So that limited my opportunities. If I wanted to move to a whole other city and get the star anchor job, I might have been able to, but I didn't want my whole family's life dictated by that. I'd already done that earlier in my career.
Right.
So I just had the baby, about 8, 9 months old, and the station had been bought out by a new affiliate. It had rebranded. It had money. So now it's Fox 5. It went from Fox 6 to Fox 5. Now we're getting into insider stuff. My agent calls me and they said they're starting the whole show. They're putting money back in. They're hiring producers. They're being backed by Tribune. They want you to come in. And I said, oh, okay, well, now that's different, right? Because now you have, okay, but my suit didn't fit. I had just, I was like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting that right away. And so I do remember talking to my husband. I go, okay, I can kind of snap and get back into zone. I had already kind of started thinking of a different, like, what am I going to do? Slow down. And so I kind of snapped right back into it. And then before I had the opportunity, I got into the suit, I figured it out, but they had hired Arthel Neville, I believe, from the network. And so it wasn't even a matter of that it's just they had other plans for their launch. And so that went away. And so that's what I mean by sometimes it's not about you. It's just, I kind of was like, oh, well, maybe. So I had already set a path for myself. And then I kind of got pulled back in by an opportunity that maybe wasn't an opportunity. So maybe it was a good thing that it didn't work out.
Right. And I see that all the time.
It didn't hurt me. It was just like, oh, well, I was going to try to snap out of it and do this whole thing, but well, I guess it wasn't meant to be. And I kind of just went back into my zone and it was okay.
Right.
Yeah.
How many times
Yeah.
do you see women who take a leap into entrepreneurship or a different area because basically out of necessity to start? So it's not because they want to create this new opportunity, but maybe they lost their job. And so they're like, I have to do something to make money. And then it ends up being like the thing that they're successful at. And that's really fulfilling. And so those little opportunities that go away are oftentimes the best thing that could ever happen.
Yes. And sometimes you need that push, right? Because if
Yes.
you don't get that voice, and like I said, sometimes it's intuition, but sometimes you need a push. And that push doesn't always feel good sometimes, right? The push until you look back on it when it works and you're like, oh, that is the push that I needed. And so I guess for people who are thinking about that, I always believe there is a reason. And that's not true. Sometimes there isn't a reason, but there is a reason that you make the decisions that you do to get to where you need to go, because that's what makes you strong. That's what allows you to take that next step. And if you have to, and that's actually better sometimes if you need to, because it gives you back the skills. Nobody wants to lose their job or have to start over out of necessity and have scarcity, right? But it does make you a little more hungry and work a little harder and get really clear on what you're going to do to make it happen.
Yes. And I often feel that, failure is actually better than being complacent. That I would rather be pushed out of something that then encourages me to try something else than to just settle for mediocrity, to settle for something that just doesn't fuel me. And especially over 40, I can't say
I know.
that
And
enough.
I think you reach a point, but I also do want to say, if people are listening, sometimes people see, type A people like you or me, and sometimes it's okay to stay where you are. if that actually makes you happy. Because I work with a lot of clients who are go-getters and top of the, this is what we're doing, we're trailblazers. But I also used to do women's speaking groups for more of my community and different people. And sometimes people don't want to play as big.
Right.
And it's
Right.
okay. You don't need
Right.
to feel bad about that.
Yes. As long as you understand yourself.
Yes.
That you know exactly what your motivating factors are. And
Yes.
then, because it may be being home, it may be taking some time off from work and working on your own health and mental health. Like you're
Yes.
absolutely right, Angela, and that oftentimes we have that go-getter mentality, especially online too, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
go big or go home. Like sometimes it doesn't have to be one or the other. Sometimes you could
Yeah.
just show up and it's okay.
Yeah. And I want people to honor that. I think the core of my work is honoring where you are. If you want to go big and you feel bad because you're not going big and you're holding yourself back and you think about it all the time and there's something blocking you, then you need to work on that and you need to go big. If you see people around you doing things that you think you need to do, but you're actually good with it and you start to feel like you need to be like them, I don't want you to do that either.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like, it's really about peeling back all the layers. And that's what I did after I left the news is I'd peel back. I never had an opinion. We didn't go on camera with an opinion. And so it took me years to peel back, becoming a blogger. That's how we met with
Yes.
Mom Logic. So I
Yes.
became a parenting mom
You were
blogger,
the Zen mommy.
I was the Zen mom. And I loved that. But that was the evolution of me finding my deeper voice. It was never about parenting. It was always about the mom. It was always about the woman they were becoming, the woman, and I threw in some baby tips and all the things that bloggers did. But as I evolved, it was never about the food or the bottle or the sleep training. That was just the content at the time that I was producing. But as the kids evolved, my story was always about finding peace in the chaos. And I discovered meditation and different health habits, but it was always about the woman and becoming the best that they could be for their family.
Right.
And
And
so the Zen,
you were ahead of
yeah,
the game with the Zen mom too, because this was 10 years ago, more
yeah,
than
10
10 years
years.
ago. And now we're in a place where meditation and yoga and all of that is just part of our everyday
Yeah.
life. But it was a little out there still for people 10 years ago.
And sometimes it still is, but it's definitely more popular and mainstream. I remember it's so funny that it's just an integral part of my life, of the tools that I use. When I started doing Kundalini yoga this past year, like you go deeper into the levels. But I remember I'd never meditated before I became a mom. I go, well, I call myself the Zen mom. I should probably do some Zen stuff. But I've always been into yoga and personal development. I've always loved that kind of stuff. But I was like, what is this? Okay, meditation. So I went to the Chopra Center. I remember I went to this, and this is before I had discovered women's retreats and women's networks. And I think my son was only about a year old. And I go, honey, I need something. I need to figure this out. And I'm going to go. And talk about not evolving. I went to a 2-day workshop at the Chopra Center in San Diego. And because I hadn't evolved yet, I chose not to stay overnight. I'm like, I'll pick one that's like I can drive to and come back and drive to and come back. And at that point, it was all about the baby, all about life. And I didn't honor that it was okay if I had one night away.
Right. Right.
But interesting how I evolved. That's not how I am now. But, it was a very interesting, I spent a weekend workshop there and I realized like, that's it. You just close your eye. There wasn't much to it actually the whole weekend. And it was really about that. The key takeaway from meditation is that your thoughts don't go away. It's just like a ping pong. Like they come in, they go out, they come in, they go out. And there were some mantras and we practiced it. But to take a whole workshop in meditation, it was interesting. It was actually coming to the realization that it didn't have to be perfect, right? When you think you meditate, like, well, I can't meditate because I have to be quiet and I can't have thoughts and I'll never shut down my thoughts. And they're like, no, you're never going to shut down your thoughts. They're still going to be there. It's just how you ping pong or how you get into the zone. And eventually you may get into a zone where you may not have thoughts, but the whole point is the practice of, not making yourself wrong that you have thoughts. But it was really interesting then. That was 10 years ago. Yeah. When I did that. So
wow. Yeah.
I've done some deeper level work since then.
Well, that's what I love about this work. They talk about practicing meditation, practicing yoga for a reason, because it's not, I think that we have these visions, at least I did, of people who are doing some of these things and that they're zen all the time and they're so calm, and what's wrong with me that I can't sit still, or,
Yeah.
and I've learned that it really is not that. So even before I record a podcast episode, I just turn everything off and spend 2 minutes and I just breathe so I can get back into a space of connecting and conversation, and not this. I tend to live up a little bit higher in the energy place.
Yeah. And well, we're TV people, right?
Yeah.
We're former, like, I live super high. And I think that's what the Zen mom was. And my Zen mom, the tagline was, because motherhood isn't always so Zen.
Right.
That was the tagline. And it was about me wanting to go on this journey of figuring that out. Now it's evolved into you amplified and kind of owning who you are. And it's all about that higher level. I mean, my kids are 10 and 11 now. It's not in that zone. Now it's about, who are you as a woman? Who are you as a leader? And how are you showing up? And what do you stand for? And what do you believe in? And that's the whole process that I went through for myself in the last 10 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, you evolved again.
I evolved again. Yeah.
Out of the Zen mom thing. And in this place where you're coaching women to find their voice, that's one of the things I love about you, is that we are in that same space of really encouraging women, whether it's in your own family or in politics or speaking on a stage, it doesn't matter. Finding your voice is really just owning who you are and what you stand for in your life.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean squawking. It doesn't mean like getting on a soapbox, spewing all of your thoughts and feelings every second you have them. It just means really understanding yourself and then putting yourself out there with confidence. And so what kind of results have you seen with women in this work that you're doing?
I love working with women, corporate and entrepreneur women. And I also work with some men when I have corporate accounts. But for women, what I find is, we all struggle, not all, but even leaders, high level, high achieving leaders struggle with the same thing. So I'm a media and communication coach. So I focus on speaking, video, and media, almost mixing the personal development with it. So when an executive or an entrepreneur comes to me that's a thought leader and they're ready to go out in space, they usually come in because I have to be on a panel and I'm not sure what to do. Or my boss says I have to give this speech and I'm starting to be more upfront. Or an entrepreneur says, I'm ready to, promote my book. I want to do videos and I'm not sure. They come in for that reason, right? Because or I'm going to go on the Today Show tomorrow, help me with my interview, and the publicist will send them in. It's for the tactical training parts, which I do. But when they get to the inner core, they realize that, I want my clients to be clear, confident, connected on camera and off. Yes. I want them to embody who they are. I want them to show up at a conference the same way you see them on video, that they can pivot. If they're going to do a 30-minute podcast, then they can do a mini keynote, then they can interact with their team. And it should be aligned. Doesn't mean there's something wrong if it's not, but when you embody who you are and you're fully owning your power and owning your voice, that's what I would like my clients to do. So what I've seen in the results is that people come in for one reason or the other because something's coming up or they know that they have to do something. And when we do the You Amplified work, if there's an emergency, we'll do the training for that interview first, just to get them through, or the panel. Right. And then I go, now let's do steps 1 through 4. We'll go backward, which is awareness. Where are you now? Where would you like to be? Breaking through those barriers that we talked about. Some people have done a lot of inner work. Some people haven't. How you were raised makes a big impact. For me, it was because I was raised Asian. I even have male clients. I talk about this in one of my first podcast episodes. I talk about owning your voice. He was raised Irish Catholic, and he was taught to be really quiet and not to brag. And his mom said that it wasn't good. And he said, I never thought about that, and he never gave his own speeches. He always had his team do it. And I was trying to get him out of his shell. So men struggle with this too. But for women, it was about that piece of breaking down those inner barriers. And then how do you want to show up? Right? We have to peel back. Like, I don't even know. Like, how do people see you? How do you show up? Right? Going through that process. And then what is your message? That's another separate step. Right. But once you go through those pieces, and so that's what I've seen people go through this process. They think they're coming in because I need to give a speech. And when they leave, they go, oh, I'm actually pretty talented. They hadn't owned. So some women come in because they think they need to fix themselves. It's always the overachievers. I have this one woman, she's a good speaker, but she needs to be better, and she's good at this. And for her to come in was really like, oh, I actually need to own that I'm actually doing a really good job. I'm
Right.
actually good at what I do, and I own the room and not be apologetic about it. And that when I show up, I don't have a hesitancy in my voice. Like, she was so perfect that she's like, I would give her something to do and she would write 5 notes and she'd go, okay, I'm going to do this tomorrow. And I'm going to do this. And I said, slow down. Like, so for the overachievers, it's actually knowing that she was enough. And where did that come from? That because she powered through everything. She got everything she wanted because she, raised by a single mom. She just was always successful. But it's rewriting the script, right? What got you to where you were, same thing. I rewrote my script. What got me to where I needed to be in my 20s and 30s isn't the same script that's going to get me to the next level.
That's exactly right. I could not agree with you more in that if you go back to in your 20s and having that safety plan at Paramount and not just jumping in, all of the messages that we're getting from other people, I feel like we're wearing Teflon or something in our 20s.
Yeah.
And so those things are like flying at us and they're like, boom, boom, we're just knocking them off of us. And then in our 30s, and sometimes we have kids, sometimes we don't, we start to slow down. And then in our 40s, I swear that programming from our 20s that we were like, that was bouncing off of us,
Yeah.
all of a sudden starts to sink in. And I see women then going, oh, what if I'm not supposed to do this? What if I'm not enough? What if I this? What if I that? And it's all like all of the messages from childhood, from young adulthood are just building up. And that's the time I believe that personal development is absolutely not only the most important, but the most impactful. And so the fact that you're bringing this work to and I know you don't only work with women over 40, but when I work with women over 40 specifically, they've lived enough life. They know what they feel is probably a BS story that they're telling themselves, and they're more willing to work through it. Do you find that?
There's some people who aren't willing to look at it, and that's okay. If they're not willing to look at it, they're not going to do the work and they're not going to grow. It'll come at a different season. It may not be the right time for them. And that's what also I've learned through my coaching. I don't make anyone do anything. They come because they're called to make a shift. And when they are, and they actually see the awareness, and then it's like opening up, then they want to do the work. And if there are people who aren't ready, right, you have to actually want to be out there or want to show up. Like, once you see that, sometimes it's a little jarring, and you were asking about results. So for some people, it was that, they're so talented that they didn't see that they were talented. For other people, they realized that just learning how to be on camera, learning how to do a speech actually affected other parts of their life and where they were speaking up or showing up or not. And that's always when I think when you get aligned and clear on who you are and what you stand for, then you realize, oh, it's not just about giving this speech.
Right.
Where else have I not been showing up this way, right? I'm doing it for my team. Am I showing up at home? So that's the results that I see from people. And it's hard to explain when, people just want to be good on the panel and not make a fool of themselves in front of the company. But ultimately, my goal is great. I will get you ready for that. But I want you to have a deeper level realization so that you know who you are and what you stand for, so you can show up anywhere. You don't have to keep retraining or putting on a Band-Aid or a sticker to get through this one thing. It's like, no, let's kind of see where you are now, and then you can continue to grow. You don't have to tackle it all at once. Either you can do one piece, and maybe do video later or that later, but at least you're aligned internally.
Yes.
Right?
And then when you're aligned internally, you're just unstoppable.
Yeah. And it shifts. And I think you need to honor each season. Like, I shifted because I'm still evolving and growing. I look back on the newborn mom me, totally different, even though I'm always the core person the same than I am now. I'm much more at peace. I'm very focused. I'm clear. I've done the work. I've helped others. So I'm very clear. But then each time as I grow, I was like, oh, okay. I call myself out. And I think that's how you continue to grow. I have no problem going, no, I'm not good in that area. I know it and I'm not doing it. And that's my own thing. And why am I not doing it? And that's when you can kind of coach yourself. It's that when you're blind to it, that it makes it hard. But it doesn't mean I'm done or I'm perfect. It's just, are you willing to call yourself out? And sometimes people don't want to see it. So it's easier to hide.
Yes. But it's so uncomfortable, and I've talked about this with other guests, with Courtney Townley when she was on, that like you could be uncomfortable now or you can be uncomfortable later. But either way, you're going to be uncomfortable. It's just going to be in a different way. And so if you're able to call yourself out now, you'll reap the benefits later. But if you're going to hide, then it's going to be a lot tougher in the long run. But
I know.
let's talk about Power of the Only. I'm
Oh, thank you.
really
Yes.
excited about your new podcast. You just launched it on International Women's Day. What a perfect day to
Yes.
do that.
Thank you.
And tell me about what is the Power of the Only?
The power of the only is that, it started as a lot of the women in the workforce studies. McKinsey said that women onlys at work, their voices didn't get noticed, that there's so few women in the higher executive levels. And when there's the only women, their voices get drowned out and there's not much power in that. And I was like, okay, because I was writing some keynotes and I was looking up some research. This was a few years ago. And then I started looking back on my life. I was like, well, I know it's more difficult and I'm kind of sad things aren't changing. A lot of things need to shift, but I've always been the only Asian girl growing up, or the only woman in the room, or the only woman speaker at conferences sometimes. But you know what? It doesn't bother me. And I didn't like the narrative of that it was a weakness. I believe that yes, it's difficult sometimes and people are tired and it's
Right.
not always your fault, and organizations need to shift and culture needs to shift. But as you can see in the last several years, we're not there yet. And so what do you do in the meantime? Doesn't mean it's all on you, but I find power in being the only. So I wanted to find the through line of the onlys, and not just women, people breaking through barriers to find the odds and creating change. When you are the only, not necessarily just the trailblazers, but when you are the only of something in a situation that's the status quo, there's, I think, a set of tools. I call them the 5 power of the only principles that help you get through that, help you navigate that. So I have my own that helped me thrive when I was the only. And I never wore it on my sleeve. Like I walked into a room and like, oh, I'm the only. Like that wasn't the issue. It was that when I looked back and I go, oh yeah, I was the only. How did I navigate through that? What was difficult? Why was I able to navigate that and someone's not? Or that's what I'm trying to find out. So I'm interviewing the onlys that are in their field, people who are thinking differently, thinking bolder, whether it's about promoting diversity or inclusion or innovation. I think it's time. The last 2 years, I've always had a keynote called Breaking Through Barriers and Cultural Stereotypes, and I've been doing keynotes. But in the last 2 years, with everything that's happened in our world, my message wasn't bold enough. I even looked at my own speeches and I was like, like it was just whatever I was saying before. Oh, it's about being confident and about standing up. It's all those things. But something shifted in the last several years, and we need more voices. We need
Right.
bolder voices. We need voices, the power of the onlys that are wanting to create change. And I wanted to create a platform to find the through line of what makes it a strength for somebody and not for another. And those that have achieved success. So it's for the onlys that are looking to empower themselves. But I also think that leaders who may not think that they're onlys can learn from the onlys. There are certain traits and qualities that all of us can learn from. And so
Right.
that is the power of the only.
I love it.
Yeah, we have some amazing guests, and also be doing a lot of solo episodes, anything dealing with, how are we going to empower ourselves, the status quo. I have some episodes on, are you feeling enough? Why does it have to be so hard? Anything to help you own your voice and your power and really step up and really make a difference is my goal.
Right. And you're already just launched a couple days ago and you're already doing such important work. There are a lot of women in the 40 Thrive community who I believe are the onlys in many ways, in different fields, in different environments, in different communities. So what advice would you give them when they know they're the only, they know there's power in it, but they're terrified? How do they find the courage to stand up and be that only in a time where they're being more marginalized than ever?
In the very first episode, and I will give you a teaser, the very first episode, I talk about why I start the podcast. I also give the 5 principles of the power of the only. I'll give them to you right now, and then you can go deeper into the podcast if you'd like. And I really think it goes down to, number 1, we talked about this, owning your power. You are enough. And to look back on your accomplishments. A lot of times when you start something new or you feel like you're the only, you think it's not enough. Are you taking up space? Are you owning your power? Right? Number 2, owning your voice. All those things we talked about, not just owning my voice and giving a speech, but have you taken the time to align yourself and figure out what you want? And sometimes that takes a little while. It doesn't happen overnight. And it may shift different stages of your life. One thing that I think is really important is seeing it as a privilege and not a burden. That was a big one.
That's huge. Say that
That's
again.
huge.
That's worth repeating.
Yeah. Number 3 is to see it as a privilege and not a burden.
I love that.
Because I think it's hard if you're the only, whether that means only meaning like you differing from the status quo in your mindset, or you're the only Black woman in the room. I got a lot of pushback from my Black friends because they're like, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of teaching and talking and being the one. And that's when it starts to feel like a burden, when you're the only, you're the explainer, you're the thing. And I totally get that. But here's the thing. We need more bridges. And if you are in a position of power and you have a seat at the table, when I was a news reporter and I had a seat at the table that dictated what made the news and what didn't, what was okay to cover and was not, how I covered my stories, my voice mattered. I'm not from China. I was born in, the US, but I do have some Chinese values. I can see things, or I was maybe from a certain city. And it doesn't have to be ethnically. It could be like, I grew up in that city and that's not how people think, or I'm Chinese and that's not how people think, or I'm a woman and that's not. You need to be able to, if you have somewhat power in that situation, you do need to say something because you impact it. We didn't always have the freedom. We have much more freedom now. A lot of things have not changed, but at least people are more open to it. But even when they didn't change before, if you were in a place where you had the opportunity, I feel like we need to take it. But I also do honor when there's a situation where it doesn't warrant your energy. So I think that's the distinction. Right. Seeing it as a privilege and a burden to speak up and share about it and try to break through. But there are times where maybe you're just in a place that just isn't going to budge. You're in a conversation that's not going to move forward. It may not be the place to show up as the only. Maybe save your power for a different day. And I think that's really important for trailblazers. You don't want to burn out. Right. You don't want to fight every fight. You just want to show up.
Right. For you personally, how do you know the difference? Are there signs?
I always try. I will never stay quiet. Like let's say something in a newsroom, or even even in a neighborhood conversation. I'll give you this. Maybe in my community, with a lot of Asian backlash, like I kind of can walk the line. There's a while back where a lot of Chinese were buying out all the houses, right, for cash. And there's this kind of anti-Chinese sentiment. And then with the whole coronavirus. But I always felt I'm a Chinese American. I'm very American, but I'm very Chinese. And I can see both sides and beyond. And so we'll have neighborhood conversations and I'll be like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think your neighbor is that, I'll just kind of ask questions. And they'll be like, oh, I didn't know that. Or if we get getting into a fight, it's not worth it. You know what I mean? But I will not, if someone says something either offensive or not appropriate, I will just kind of see where they're, I'll make it known. If it's in a business setting, if it's something that I think I can add value to, I go, well, would you think that person, or maybe that wouldn't be the right decision because maybe the other, like I kind of try to be the bridge, right? I'm not going to come out going, you're absolutely wrong. That's horrible. And that's not the way, right? So the fourth step is actually speak in a way that others can hear you.
I love that.
Because everyone's just fighting everywhere about everything. So owning your power and your voice does not mean fighting every fight and being upset at everything.
Right. And I think we've lost the ability to see each other, or maybe we don't agree on specific issues or look at things the same way. And we're so quick to say that you're wrong, or that I'm wrong. And then it ends up being an argument where we're never going to come together if we're not able to speak to each other in a way that's much more effective.
Yes. And that's why I and it's so interesting how I came up with these. I literally sat down because I got the idea of the power of the only, and I go, what are the things that allow me to feel like I get people, right? I really do get people. And I think it comes from my parents because they were immigrants. I had to translate for them all the time. I kind of raised myself in certain ways. I kind of had to be older than I was. And I can always see beyond what's face. And also being a journalist, seeing both sides, I feel like I bring that to the table. So I was thinking of the principles of what actually does allow me to feel comfortable in those situations. And I came up with 5, and I want to see if they're true. They help people, if other people can add on to it. And it was really important. So in the next several episodes, we also talk about how to have difficult conversations. We talk about diversity. I interview Hispanic women, Black women. I'm going to interview a couple men that are the onlys in their industry. And so I want to find the connection. So these are the things that we're going to go deeper into. I've laid the 5 principles, but now I want to see, well, what do other people have to add? Are these true? Does it work? And I really do believe, though, if we put these together, things need to be done differently these days. The way people think, even companies are trying to create change, and they're just putting the same old Band-Aid on the same things. And it's not that that's not working, but at least now people are open to the conversations. They're trying, and now it takes the onlys to start stepping up and going, you know what I've been thinking all along is actually beneficial, and I'm not going to hide anymore, and I'm going to bring it to the forefront, and I'm going to start planting the seeds.
Right.
That's what I want to do. I empower people that are bridges to start planting the seeds, and let's see what happens.
I love it. And sometimes, you're maybe the only in your family.
Yes.
So it doesn't necessarily only relate to the corporate world or to the, your career. I love what you're doing. I think it's amazing. I love watching you evolve over and over again.
Oh, thank you so much.
And innovate. And I think that that's really the definition of women over 40, of 40 thriving, is understanding what your strengths are, what maybe your weaknesses are, where you can make a difference, where you can use your voice. I think it's just so powerful, and I love everything that you're doing.
Oh, thank you so much. And I love everything you're doing. It's like parallel when you watch, it's like, yes, and it's like you're the only, you're planting the seeds, and other people will take them when they need them, for whatever they need them for. Like you said, whether it's for their community or for just in their household, or if they're doing big things in the world. And it doesn't always have to be huge to really make an impact. It just has to be real and what you want.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think that if we continue to empower other women to find their voice, to show up for their lives, to do the things that maybe they were too afraid to do, then I can't even imagine what life over 40 will look like for women everywhere. Thank you, Angela. I will definitely link to your website and your podcast in the show notes and all that, and so everybody can follow you there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Angela, and thank you so much for listening. Sharing is caring, baby. If this episode speaks to you, think of that one friend who could benefit from it. Share it with her. And if you haven't already, hit that big, beautiful subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. You will never have to search for another 40 Thrive episode again. Until next time, take care and keep thriving. Spring has sprung, and with the change of seasons, sometimes comes an increase in vitality. If you're feeling in the mood for a little more personal time, may I suggest Coconut. Coconut is all about providing clean and natural ingredients when you're enjoying your most intimate moments, with or without a partner. Naturally safe products developed by people who are obsessed with quality. Get 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Coconut. That's 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Coconut.